and the saviors are kind of like drugs, and we just abuse the fuck out of our savior functions and our savior animals, because this is what's going to fucking get it done. The function animals are almost like instinct stackings in the way that they're structured. Growth with both the Enneagram and with these, from the point of view of MBTI, which is, we're still talking about personalities, like you've got to address your blind spot.
My blast lasts, like, I don't even think to tell anybody anything about what's going on.
We're next level black slap.
The big hormone Enneagram.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres, 4-5 wing, 458 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9-1, 974 trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing 7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
There's a way that opposites attract, and that's true also in other systems, like in the cognitive type, you know, the idea of your savior versus demon functions, and generally you're avoiding your demon functions and eventually it catches up to you. And so when you meet somebody who embodies those demon functions, it sort of like creates a complete loop. And yeah, like, you know, I've heard about the temperaments. And so like this pod has like a NTF, NF kind of temperament. And the opposite of that would be like a SF temperament, which I would guess that Nancy probably embodies that aspect of things.
What is it?
So SF is, or when S is meaning for sensory, and then F is for feeling. So SF would be the popularity game, sort of like valuing things in reality. So like, you know, how good you look and how good you sound, and, you know, the social media game. It's, you know, also paying attention to how what you're doing is affecting the way people respond out there. Like, and so a lot of times I think the shadow of the way we approach things is that we're pretty much like right brain, idea, intuitive types. And that's pretty much all we do on this pod, which can create this unaddressed shadow of you're not paying attention to the sensory and how that's valuable and the popularity game. So, you know, you might write a book and it's full of these great ideas, but you have such a terrible time packaging the book together and promoting it. Whereas some fucking idiot, you know, who doesn't have great ideas like Ian Crone can put a book together and get it promoted, and lots of people can read it, but it doesn't really have great ideas. So generally
and that's sensory partly.
Yeah, sensory. SF is just the celebrity popularity game. You know, the popularity game is how good you look, how good you sound, how much people like you in physical reality. And then the conceptual game is just kind of what we're doing, which is, you know, generating conceptual abstractions. And so if you're doing one side of things, you're completely ignoring the other. But so, for example, Beth is, I believe, in a SF type, and so she's a doer, and she's very external in that way. And the downside is that you kind of feel like you're on a hamster wheel and you don't necessarily have a plan. So with abstract and conceptual, it's kind of like charting a path or making connections or narrowing things down. And SF is just getting out there and doing it. So usually if you're really good at one, you suck at the other. You know, in a relationship, you can feel really comfortable with someone who's doing the same thing you are, or you can be really challenged by someone who embodies, you know, those shadow aspects of your personality that you're not addressing.
Sort of related to that might be like, how do you adopt, like what does it mean to be reactive if you're like with a reactive partner or something? So like, I don't know, in these functions, but like how would you address like a SF balancing the NF whatever?
Yeah, I like that idea because you can apply that concept to the Enneagram, where it's like, if you're a reactive type, there is a unaddressed shadow with the other triads.
Mhm.
So at least what I've learned from studying OP is that you're gonna want to avoid your demon functions if you don't pay attention to them. If you don't put some conscious effort into, you're not gonna want to do it. Sort of like working on a blind spot, but putting attention into getting just a little bit better, it's just gonna catch up to you because it's eventually, if you don't address some aspect of reality that's important, it just keeps piling up until one day you have a crash.
We're back. Big hormone transmitting. Today we are talking objective personality. Emeka is blasting in our face. All over
our
us.
face.
Instead
We
of
are
me this time. Before we get into it, my book is out. Please buy my book. Amazon, bookshop.org, anywhere else online. David has a Trifix book, visual guide. Buy it on Enneagrammer.com or Anyasite.com. It's very good. I wrote an intro to it, and it's very visual, and it should change the way you engage with types and Trifix and the energies of the types. Actually, as I'm even saying this, I'm just realizing like how missing that is in terms of people's fluency with the Enneagram. Just the visuals of like what type energies look like. Because today, I know I'm ranting, whatever. Somebody was posting like that there's guy, that Andrew Harvey or something that was on the shifts thing, who it looks like probably a triple positive 9 in my opinion, but could be something else. Was a 4 because he was talking about darkness, and it was like, you think this is 4 just because he's talking about darkness? Your view of type is really skewed because that's not the flavor anyway.
And people wanting to learn about the different energies of the type. Dark Arts Academy.
Yeah.
Interesting name, but Dark Arts Academy, $19 a month.
Just a huge Harry Potter fan.
Yeah, exactly. Dark Arts Academy, Enneagrammer.com, $19 a month. We have a Christmas special coming up. We are typing 2 controversial celebrities.
Retyping. It's new. We're making big changes.
Big changes for Michael Jackson.
Yes.
And Michael Jackson and Lana Del Rey.
Hell yeah.
Lana Del Rey. So it's a double feature. We really get into it. There's a lot of trigger warnings for, Michael Jackson stuff. But it's a Christmas special.
That's awesome.
Join Dark Arts Academy to see what the fuck we think, and just fessing up to mistakes that we have made.
And it's actually really funny too. It's like great because I'm not on it, but I've watched some of it, and like seeing everybody's face instead of just our fucking voices, not their fucking voices. And it's funny and it's fun and it's really interesting.
And again, we are raising money for audio equipment. If you are appreciating the clarity in John's voice and my voice, we don't sound like we're far away in the astral plane anymore. We are investing in some audio equipment. We're trying to raise $500 to get some new microphones, audio interface that we can hopefully use to record a live pod together at some point.
That'd be awesome.
Send us some money
for a Christmas gift.
Yeah. Christmas gift for your favorite pod. Send us some money at bhepodcast@gmail.com. That's our PayPal, or you can Venmo us some money at EMEKV. Just leave a note for BHE Pod audio equipment, and all that money will go towards buying some new audio equipment.
It's a great gift for your Republican parents. You can just say, I gave in honor of you to this lovely podcast.
There you go.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and buy my book for Christmas for people, please.
Yeah. Give it to them randomly with no explanation.
Yeah, don't even explain it. Just, this is the cult I'm in. And here's the handbook.
Save me.
And then pretty soon, coming up, next episode maybe? Is our fucking 100th episode. So
that's the next episode after this. And then the New Year's episode is just us just talking shit and getting
being
drunk.
I cannot wait, personally.
I mean, we got to look at like stats from the year and review like what we've done and
I'll
shit
see if
like
I
that.
can get Brian drunk and then get him on too.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm going to get Beth on here.
Yeah, we'll get Alexander on here. That'd be fun.
I'm gonna take some mushrooms, I think, and see what happens.
That's a good
Perfect.
idea,
Good.
but you have to be able to
Perfect.
talk while you're on mushrooms.
Yeah, don't
that's
take
the-
too
we'll
many
see.
where your mouth just won't
David will
open.
just go to the astral plane and say that.
No blasting, even more no blasting.
Complete lack.
So yeah, we somehow started talking about objective personality today, and we just been doing a deep dive. And so John's gonna make sure everybody gets all the information so they don't get lost.
Yeah,
And I'll
I'm
just
gonna
be here confused in a corner.
try to organize some of this shit. So, I don't know MBTI, which is Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, very well, but all I know is it is based on Jungian functions, like functions that Carl Jung described, and then organized by Myers and Briggs, I guess.
Mhm.
And it is so popular online, and I can't tell you, like, at least on the Instagram account, the Big Hormone Instagram account, like half the people that respond are like MBTI people.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it, like, there's some good stuff in there, but most of the interpretation sucks, just like the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And so, this objective personality seems to solve a lot of issues that a lot of the mainstream stuff has. And so,
And I should preface that that's similar to the way people respond to our approach with Enneagrammer and Big Hormone. I appreciate and respect the objective personality people, Dave and Shan, that they have said, we're just going to try to understand MBTI in our own way and develop things that actually help us, not just making stuff up and propping our identities up, but like what's actually usable. And because that was my approach to the Enneagram. It's like, if I can't use a concept, then it's not really
Usable and observable.
yes. Like, what does a type 8 really mean in reality in a normal person? Like, just that those sort of
Mhm.
questions. That's been their approach with MBTI, and so it makes it from an inner development, self observation point of view. It makes MBTI more useful than any other way of looking at it than I've encountered. So that's why I've gotten hooked by objective personality, and I got hooked by it because there were a couple nuggets or concepts that were immediately impactful on my understanding of other people.
yeah, and you got to kill your gods or kill your teachers, kill your heroes, and kill your idols. And I just one of the major problems that we complain about all the time is that people try to understand the Enneagram, and then they make some statements that seem like authoritative, and then people just try to preserve those statements without testing them and without like modifying or updating or thinking new about them, and that just gets passed on and proliferated. And so I like that anywhere people are like creatively and like with like real understanding trying to unpack things versus just like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
And this sounds like it's a system that does that effectively.
Doesn't their system, their particular version of like MBTI, you could sort of say, integrate more with the Enneagram and the instincts and stuff?
Well, I think the way they're doing it is more applicable to the Enneagram than anything that I've encountered before,
Okay.
because there's like an inner development sort of approach. Because just the idea of, and we talk about with the Enneagram, of fixation and a blind spot, their system and the way that they're framing MBTI addresses that, and I haven't seen that before. Because if you can identify that you have a blind spot or a savior versus a demon, it's like, oh shit, there's something that I have to focus on and work on that I'm completely not paying attention to. So you have an inner growth development path from that
Also-
approach.
Also, one of their main emphasis is you're typed wrong. You've typed
Yes.
yourself wrong.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's one reason I really like them. I remember people would just talk shit about them, and I'm like, oh, that sounds familiar.
The shit you're saying.
I mean,
all
I
shit
think
I've heard.
it'd be good. Like y'all have referenced objective personality a couple times, and I think like even just giving like an overview, and then we can have them on later, so that like for example, instead of having them just introduce their whole system and it just being like
Mhm.
completely fresh, I don't know. It might be good that like we and listeners have like some like
Baseline. Yeah.
baseline, and then we can have more interesting discussions with them, because they like, who knows, but like I don't want to gamble on that they just
Over
want to keep
there.
coming back on and back on and back on, so that when as we get deeper with it, we want to ask them more questions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's unlikely that they're going to keep coming back on. And the thing about it is that their system is so rich. It's not like we need them to come on here and explain what their system is. It's more like it'd be cool to explore certain overlaps and similarities between Enneagram and OP. But what's interesting to me, I mean, I can give an overview of what they're doing with MBTI and why it's significant to me.
Yeah, all that kind of shit, like just like the real, like that kind of overview basic stuff, and like even just a little bit about MBTI and what problems it has. Like, I think that'd be great.
Yeah,
because I know nothing about it.
So, like, I've been knowing about MBTI since high school, and it's just like one of those things that I didn't really find a good hook into it, and the Enneagram was the thing that hooked me. But I keep coming back to MBTI because it seems like, multiple different people online have found different ways to approach it. But, I think David shared a video that they had discovered something called the sexual modalities. And that immediately piqued my interest because y'all know that I'm obsessed with any sort of attraction, like figuring out the factors of attraction. And so what they were saying is that they're sexual modalities that are lined up with a way that each function expresses itself in a masculine and feminine way, and which masculine being like not movable and forceful, and feminine being more receptive and movable, and that expresses itself in the way that we move and we dance, and that there's something inherent to the sexual modalities that has a polarity. So, for example, if you have masculine sensory, which is SE or SI, then you have really good memory for timelines. If you're the kind of person that can say, "Oh, in 2015, I did this, this, and this," and remember details, that's masculine sensory. Whereas if you don't have masculine sensory, if you have feminine sensory, there's a polarity. If you have feminine sensory, then your intuition is masculine, which I think, John, you have it.
That sounds right.
Masculine intuition, whereas, for example, masculine sensory is kinesthetic. So there's this sense of having a sense of rhythm and having a sense of where things go, like that kind of memory. Whereas, feminine sensory or masculine intuition has visual memory. And I know, like, John, like you have like, you could, like very visual kind of memory. And I was like, that is fucking useful. And so
that's awesome.
There's an opposite polarity. So if you are a masculine sensory, you're going to be attracted to someone who has feminine sensory. And so that's just on the sensory versus intuition. And so the same thing is happening on the extroverted decider versus the introverted decider. So if you're somebody who's double masculine, so masculine sensory and a masculine extroverted decider, you're someone who is very punchy on the outside world.
You haven't said what decider is. What's decider?
Decider is your decider functions, which is our TE or FE or FI and TI. And so that's kind of, it's exactly what it means. That's how you judge and decide. And so it's either going to be you're pushing on yourself, or you're pushing on the outside world. And so those who have masculine extroverted decider are much more blunt, or more likely to be direct out there versus more likely to be pushing on themselves. I'm a little bit less clear on that one. But I found it interesting because there was some kind of polarity there, which meant that when you meet somebody, that the whole idea that you could be immediately attracted to someone, there's got to be something going on with some kind of, not just Enneagram polarity, but function polarity in the way it's expressed, either masculine or feminine.
Am I the opposite of John? Am I feminine NI?
Yeah, you're masculine sensory, so your NI is much more fluid. So your memory is kinesthetic, whereas John's sort of memory, like that Egypt stuff, is super visual, super
Right.
And I don't know, like I would say Nancy probably sounds. I think her sensory seems masculine to me.
I can't remember timelines worth shit though.
Oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Like if you ask me when I did something, it could be 5 years ago, it could be 5 weeks ago. There's no knowing.
Yeah. So I don't know.
You want to talk about? I mean, it's all complicated, but the whole animals thing.
Oh yes, we've already been referencing it because John's a super blaster, and I guess I realized that I'm also a super blaster.
Yep.
I don't know what that means, but that fits.
What just like they came up with something called the function animals, and it's really useful because the function animals are a combination of two functions together, and so the first introverted function animal is called sleep, and that is anything about preserving energy for the self, processing for the self. And so, like, an example of sleep energy would be David, and probably most likely Nancy.
Yeah, I was
Just-
gonna say definitely me. As I'm sitting here yawning.
Yeah. So sleep energy is like, I gotta, make sure I have enough energy for me, for what I want to do. So it sounds really self-prezi. And then consume energy, which is the second introverted animal, is the combination of your, I forget, your extroverted gatherer with your introverted decider. So consume is like taking in new for yourself and updating your identity based on, or like what you think about something based on a new thing that you're taking. So it sounds extra attachment type, because it's like I need to learn, or I need to go look up and learn as much as I can about a topic before I do something about it, or I start teaching about it. Like there's not enough to absorb out there. So then when you get to blast, which is the opposite of consume, it's taking your known information and teaching it or talking about it or doing something or producing something with it. I mean, a lot of the stuff I talk about is I can't learn anything unless I've applied it or talked to someone about it. That's what blast is doing. And so, John might, a super blaster can like read a chapter of a book and teach a whole workshop on it. That's what blast is supposed to be able to do. And it's useful in that, you need people who can explain things. And so that's what blast.
That's why I'm blast
last. Like Nancy and David are probably blast last, and the issue with blast last, and Beth is that it's just hard to communicate. Take your known information and like
Don't know what you're talking about.
like, because it's like when you have so much consume, or you have consume over blast, it's like there's so much information you don't know which one you should say, or how to organize it in a way that other people can take it in. So even like putting a book together, David's book, what you're struggling with is, how do I organize this fucking thing into a final package that other people can, consume? And then play energy is pinging off the outside world. Like play energy is getting on social media and like Alexandra has done, and asking people questions and responding to them. Like that back and forth of I'm expending energy with people out there, and unexpected energy. Like somebody says, hey, let's go hang out with these people right now. And it's not something on your schedule. You just go, you're like getting energy from expending energy with other people. So it sounds really social, like Joseph is Savior play, and he just gets a lot of energy with being out there and, pinging off of people and conversations and shit like that.
So that's another one. So there's Savior and Demon. So
yes. Yeah. So if like you have a Savior animal or function.
Can we pause for a sec?
Sure.
I kind of want like maybe after you do this, like we're talking about functions and stuff like this, and like I would like to even get a little clearer on like what a function is. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like the kind of like those like basic kind of bits, because I don't know, I can assume based on whatever, but I always find that, I mean, it's like with the Enneagram, was people be talking about type or thinking they know what that means, and it's like those basics like are actually. So, what is a personality within the Enneagram versus what's a personality within these alignment of functions? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it's interesting that you brought that up, because the function animals are almost like instinct stackings in the way that they're structured. And so, for example, based on what I just explained, blast and consume are about information. Consume is about taking in new information, and blast is about taking that information and doing something with it or teaching it.
So they're like on a polarity?
Yeah, there's a polarity there. But blast and consume are about information. And so if you're somebody who doesn't have a blind spot in either of the information animals, so that means that you're information dominant, in which I likely believe that, John, you are information dominant. So there's there's a sense of you're balanced on the exchange of information, and like not only are you teaching, but you want to take in at the same times. And so what happens on these pods, and people notice this, is not only are you blasting, but you're also the one who's asking the most questions. Like, really pointed questions. So, your question about like, what does the function really mean? that's more of that's an
Mm.
information dominant sort of approach. Whereas for me, it's like I'm probably consume last, or like my blind spot is consume. It's like I don't care as much as I only care as much as what I can use. And so there's a difference there. And so, what is a function? I mean, that's a whole topic. I think these guys aren't they're not information dominant types, and that's one thing that people are frustrated with them is that they don't have a fuck ton of complete information. They just discover stuff and they use it within their system. And so, what is a function? That's like good 10-15 minutes. I think the guy at cognitivetype.com has probably done the most work into those kind of definitions because he's a 5 and likely information dominant. But like I just said, there's a polarity. If you have blast and sleep, if you don't have a blind spot in blast and consume, then you're information dominant. And then if you don't have a blind spot in sleep or play, then you're energy dominant. And energy is the sleep and play is about how I'm preserving energy for myself or expending energy out there. And so David and Nancy and myself seem more energy dominant. So, and I think it plays itself out in this pod. Like, energy dominants are more interested in the vibe. And so like there's trying to like less interested in information and more interested in like shifts of energy. And so more silly and jokey, and not to say that you're not jokey, but you're much more serious about the information.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense, actually. Like, I will just like be like, all right, this is a vibe, but let me just disrupt the vibe to get the information.
You will destruct the vibe to get the information.
It's true.
That's really like, because I like this edit, because I mean, it's making me think about like if some aspect of human personality or human cognition or whatever is measured by functions, and the functions fall into this like information or energy, like there's like two fundamentals or kind of interesting polarities that we're operating on.
Very interesting polarities. And one thing that I really appreciate from what they've done with the function animals. Functional animals are a really big deal concept, in terms of looking at the arc of your life and looking at like, this is my blind spot. So whatever your blind spot is where you're going to be hit hard by life because you are not addressing that. So for example, if you have blast is about direction. It's about organizing externally for yourself, producing, teaching. And so if you have blast last, there's this sense of having some kind of direction for what you want to do. Like, what do I want to produce? How am I communicating? If like you have blast last, yes, there's a vision. So it can be that there's a reoccurring problem of feeling like you don't have an ability to initiate or to change paths or to communicate what you want. And this is something that I've noticed dealing with Beth. It's just like that inability to say what's going on. Like even today, there's just like a very small example. I asked Nancy if she needed to record the drunk pod on a day before she didn't have to work, and she said yes. And I was like, if I asked John that, he would have given me the dates that he could do it. Like, there's a sort of blast is over eager to give the known information. And I had to ask again, so what days are you?
It did not even occur to me.
That was like,
that makes so much
obviously
sense.
the weekend. God.
It's just like, I'm trying to get something done. I need to know what days.
Oh, that's so funny.
Seems intuitive. I don't know why you need more information from me.
So yeah, blast is like, I know that this is what needs to happen next, so I'm going to tell you what you need to know in order to take the next step. And so,
my blast lasts like I don't even think to tell anybody anything about anything that's going on for me.
We're next level blast last.
This is cool because like I sort of thought of just like the cartoon of blast I was getting is that like oh, you talk too much or something, but like this makes a lot more sense with like a vision and things like that.
Yeah. Like people who are play dominant also talk a lot. Like like play as a savior are gonna, like Joseph. He talks a lot. And just pinging off of people. Whereas blast is like you can just. I guess doing this pod was just a revelation for me. Just because you forget that you have I don't know, certain abilities. Like I didn't know that I could talk this much. I mean, it's like you don't. Part of the thing is like, oh, I'm not seeing myself,
Right.
and
right.
that's
Yeah.
the consume last thing is that my identity is sort of like a blind spot that I'm not taking in enough information to actually see myself, and
Mm,
so I have to. By
Mm.
doing things, I've been able to realize certain things about myself. It's like, oh man, it's kind of scary to think that there's so many things about myself that I haven't discovered because I'm not taking in new
mm,
stuff. And
mhm,
so your blind spot is similar to the Enneagram. That is literally the key. And if you're not
mm,
making any efforts to address it, it's going to punch you in the face at some point.
mhm.
Mm.
So, all right. So I liked how you're going through like blast is direction, organizing. So like, like what about like I know you went over the other functions, but I feel like there was something there that just like clicked for me in terms of understanding the functions better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, the organizing functions for sleep is organizing for the self and blast is organizing for the external world.
Organizing for self. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So sleep is, someone who's sleep last doesn't take the time to really process and figure out what they've experienced means for them. Like Joseph is sleep last and he pings off of people and he might have something happen to him, but it takes a long time, even as a 4,
Hmm.
to really slow down and, actually saturate into
Digest.
the digest. Like
Mm.
he'll process things by doing more stuff.
That makes a lot of sense for not only him being social sexual, but also he used to see himself having a 7 fix.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But
There's some
his 6 fix is like glaring. And so
Yes.
Yeah.
that kind of mistyping, that's interesting.
Yeah. So sleep last is, I think it's people's blind spots is really glaring if you're dealing with them because it's just like
Mhm.
where you're weird. Like you're really fucking weird. And I'm stealing a lot of stuff that they've been saying, but like John, you seem play last, and
Yeah.
so like this, like if it's outside of your box, it's you're not really interested in doing anything that. It sounds like a 4, but it's not necessarily 4. But expending energy outside of what you're interested in, even in the dynamic of the pod, it's like like you're so fixated on the information. Sometimes it's like, I guess this is a way to put it. Like you've mentioned this to me before, is that you are amazed that I can have conversations on the fly, like just random conversations about whatever.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally.
And that's
Which to
play.
me is like,
And that's play. Right.
yeah, that's what play is. Like,
Right.
somebody just hits you up randomly about some random shit.
Yeah, totally.
And
Yeah.
and you can't do that.
No, I can't at all. I am constantly managing people's expectations because I'm like, I can't do that. I can't talk to you. Like, and last night I went to dinner with a bunch of social types and with myself. It was 4 social types in me or
Oh
something.
God.
Like, I had this book and I'm like sitting there and I'm like, I don't know how to, like, I can't, like, conversations just like bouncing and bouncing and bouncing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's no information here. And so then I just start
Yeah.
reading my own book sometimes while I'm at this restaurant table.
Yeah, like if you're not blasting, if you don't have any play, then you're relying on blast because that's the only extroverted function that you have.
Interesting. That makes sense.
So like when you are activated with people, you're in blast mode, which is just you're the only one talking.
Yeah, that's true.
So
This
what
explains
is
a
it that
lot.
makes? So what is it that's which 2 functions or polarity is like making, say, sleep dominant? Like, is that NI?
Okay.
Introverted intuition.
Yeah.
What is that?
They said or the way the system works is that in order for you to be sleep dominant, then that means your 2 savior functions are your introverted
Intuition
not just introverted organizer. Is that what that's called? And
or observer?
yeah,
Wait, can-
introverted observer. So that's either SI or NI.
Can you
And
guys
What does
clarify
that mean?
savior?
so the savior functions, at least what as they devised it in the system, I don't think it's a relative, particularly new idea for MBTI. Is your first 2 functions.
Okay, so if in like MBTI, because I'm an INFJ, then
Yours-
that would be introversion, or that would be introvert intuition, extrovert feeling.
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
if you're an INFJ, which I think you are, your savior functions are NI and FE. And I think savior is a good name because it's like this is what you're going to rely on to save the day. So when you're under
Oh, I
stress,
see.
you double down on your savior functions. You're overdoing your savior function. Every time you're talking, sort of like with Enneagram type, you're speaking from the perspective of your savior functions. And so, there might be some fours out there who aren't savior intuition types,
Right.
but they're still fours. But so it's interesting to see in ways that this stuff contrasts and overlaps with stuff we know about the Enneagram. Like, for example, you're social blind, but let's just say you had play as a savior, like Joseph does. And it's not necessarily that because he's a social type, because there's some social blinds that have savior play, like Kanye West, who's, he's so extroverted, not just because he's an assertive type, but because he's just always doing stuff with people. So it's like, what is social blindness when you peel it apart from that sense of needing to ping off of people as much as a savior play person would? So yeah, if you have your savior functions are your introverted observer, which is NI or SI, with your introverted decider, then that's sleep. And so for David, he is likely NI and FI, so he's sleep first. And then he hasn't been officially typed, but his second animal seems to be consumed. But yeah, it goes from there. And it's like you're over relying on your savior functions and your savior animals. So you can sort of look at your life and look at the things that you've overemphasized. And you didn't learn how to be a teacher, John. Like it was always there.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of being a teacher, I know you clarified some of this, but can you clarify animal function versus savior function? And then you said savior animal, which seems like a combo or something.
Yeah, well,
I'm trying to get the
animal
information.
Yeah, yes.
He's ruining the vibe to get him.
I mean,
For real.
it's
Totally
important
ruined
because
everything.
I will talk about this stuff and leave so many gaping holes in the information, and so I need somebody to fucking
All right, I'll keep being annoying.
Yeah, keep doing it.
Not that I
because
would give a shit and
You're
stop.
carrying the team.
Yeah. So like the animal functions are is like we talked about: sleep, consume, play, blast. And if you have your first two animal functions are your saviors. So you have savior animals and you have savior functions.
Wait. So what you're doing is blast, consume, sleep, play, or animal functions. These are in contrast to savior functions, which are like the introverted intuition, extrovert intuition, these kind of things, right?
Yeah, like there's the functions. Like for example, you're an INFJ, so your functions are NI, FE, TI, and SE. So your savior functions, if you're a standard INFJ, are NI and FE, and your demon functions, the things that you're avoiding are your TI and SE. But for INFJ, the distinction that they've made within their system is that there are so many different types of INFJs depending on what function animals that person is emphasizing. So for you, your standard INFJ, so your blast, your first function is blast. Because NI is taking your known organized information and FE is, blasting it out. That combination is blasting it out there. And so then you're also very introverted and you're information dominant. So that means you have blast and consume in your top three animal functions. And you also have sleep. So your last function animal is play, which is an extroverted, pinging off of people. So you're a blaster who's very focused on the information, whereas I think I'm a blaster who's more focused on the vibe because I have play, and I'm more likely to explain things in a way that's, I don't know, entertaining, that people can sort of find their way into. And I don't, I'm not as exact about
vibey.
Where things fit necessarily.
That's really that seems to explain a lot of differences that we have in our style.
Right.
Yep.
That's interesting.
So yeah, you have the functions and then you have the animals, and I found that's a huge distinction just because you could have a type twin, someone who's an INFJ. It's like, but they're so different. They're so introverted, and then like just understanding like where does this teacher stuff come from? You didn't necessarily learn that. You probably were always that way. Like where is that stuff coming from, and why is it that it's not even a matter of intelligence? Some people are just better at just vomiting what they know in a way that people want to listen. So it's like, okay, someone's a blaster versus someone who's self, processing for themselves.
Well, all right. So just so I'm kind of trying to organize information and again visualize it because I'm just playing in my type. But
Yes.
all right. So with the functions, as an INFJ, that means like NI, FE, TI, SE. The
Hmm.
two dominant ones, NI and FE, are my saviors, and then the two other ones are my demons. And
Yes.
so demon and savior are kind of the contrast or the polarity on this level.
Right. Yes.
And
For
then
both the functions and the animals, you have
okay, so
saviors and you have demons.
okay, and so demon is kind of like saying blind spot or neglected
Yes.
thing, and
Right.
savior is what you rely on.
Right. So you can almost
Okay.
look at you can look at the savior functions as like the dominant instinct, and then the third function as sort of a place that you can sort of go like the middle instinct, and then the last one as a blind spot. You're avoiding it and you're blaming it, and so I find that interesting that they kind of landed on something very similar to the stacking with the
Yeah.
Enneagram.
So the blast, consume, sleep, play, these animals,
Yeah.
are these totally like original of objective personality, or are they
Yes.
okay?
Mhm.
And and do they have they talk about like how they derived them or what they were looking at?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is that they're not information dominant, so it's not like they have it completely organized somewhere where you can sort of read do the trail of different insights that they landed on it. Like you basically have to watch a bunch of their videos, and it's they're sharing. I guess people have said similar things about this podcast where
Mm.
we are landing a lot of insights, but it's not like we've got everything organized on a website somewhere where people want like a course where they
It's
can
coming up,
step
babies.
eventually. But it's like we're landing on a lot of things and it's not necessarily organized somewhere. So it's like they've been working on this stuff for, 5+ years, and insights stack upon other insights. So it's like we realized this, and then we realized this other thing based on that. And eventually and it's like they're not using these distinctions or concepts if it doesn't help them make sharper distinctions with typing. Because, so it's usable and it's helping them make better typing distinction.
So what's David? David, what is your MBTI type?
Well, in the past, I thought it was what was it? INTJ.
You are technically an INTJ. You are
Right. Okay.
well, at least, in this system, it's just
Yeah.
they've made, a lot more distinctions as to like what type of INTJ you are.
I don't
Yeah.
know how much even listeners know about MBTI. You know what I mean? Like when we talk about
Yeah.
extroverted intuition, introverted intuition, all this kind of stuff, like these kind of basic
True.
things. Like if I say INTJ, like a lot of listeners probably will have no idea even like
Right.
what that means and how like we're immediately talking about INTJ to introverted intuition. And so like that, or extroverted feeling or how those things are related, I think maybe we need to speak to because it's just going to be like
Yeah.
hitting people in the face.
One thing that they've done, I don't think their definitions aren't super specific, but they're simple enough that it's accessible for people. And so let me find what they have for just basic definitions for what the functions are, because that's one thing they did is what does this actually mean in reality? So with FI is somebody who prioritizes their personal values first before they seek the spectrum of the tribe's reasons. And
Introverted feeling. should
that's
say
what
that.
introverted feeling is. And then NI is answers are found by going over known concepts and abstractions. And so for David, he's super, conceptual guy, and it's not necessarily that his stuff is logical or factual in reality. It's just these are cool abstractions that I value. Whereas someone who has NT, like NI or NTI or NI and TE, I haven't got my typing back yet, but I suspect I'm going to be some kind of NT. It's like, well, how does that work? How does that fit
Yeah.
together? How does that?
So
you
wait,
know-
NT would be an intuition and then thinking.
Yeah, some kind of thinking.
Okay.
And so together you get people who invent tools. With NT, it's about conceptual tools, and I feel like at least a lot of my approach to the Enneagram is taking a lot of you and David's NF woo stuff and bringing it down into
Yeah.
into like some kind of usable reality.
Yeah.
Because I think the majority of people are sensory, or
Right.
sensory types, and are going to have a fair amount of like this needs to make sense in reality. And I'm not necessarily a factual reality person, but the T helps ground things in a concrete way, where it's not just this is valuable because it's valuable. Like for John, like you're saying, this is valuable externally for everyone. Like this is the way we should approach the Enneagram because this is how we grow with it. That's extroverted feeling. And for David, it's kind of like, I think this is cool. Here it is.
That's
Right.
it.
And so my understanding is that the basic like building blocks of this system are based in functions, which are like you could say like ways we process information. Is that accurate?
Yes. I think the best way to look at MBTI is that these are cognitive functions.
Okay.
And I used to think maybe this was confined to the thinking center alone, but the guy who runs cognitivetype.com has been studying MBTI and cognitive functions because they're actual processes in the brain. So, which means you can actually study them. So, if you're engaging in introverted intuition, there are certain brain processes that are being engaged, and same thing with FE. And so, that's another person to check out who's, I think, doing excellent work with MBTI, although very differently. But he's approaching things much more scientifically. And my understanding of what he's discovered is that the MBTI, or these cognitive functions, are brain processes.
Interesting. That makes sense to me. And so the building blocks is like there's the different polarities. So there's like intuition versus sensation, and then there is feeling versus thinking, and that these can either be introverted or extroverted. And so like I think, can you explain those? And also, can you explain what introversion and extroversion mean in this system? Because most people think of introvert as just like, I like to be alone versus with people.
Oh, yeah. And that's a big topic because, I mean, there are multiple dimensions of introverted versus extroverted. So intuition can either be extroverted or introverted. So when intuition is introverted, like NI, it's about organizing concepts. Concepts are like, making connections, like making guesses and intuitive leaps, but then trying to narrow those down and organize concepts. And extroverted intuition is sort of like it's a gathering function. So it's gathering concepts, but like it's wanting new concepts. And so multiple concepts. And Joseph is in any, he was typed as an any dominant person. And that part of the reason why he mistyped as that's what he's doing. Like part of the reason he mistyped as a 7 is because he's got this monkey brain thing of one idea leading to the next, whereas NI is more like, all right, let's take this one idea and let's narrow it down and then narrow it down even more and penetrate beneath that layer and that sort of thing. So it's introverted versus extroverted, or like it's like a microscope versus so like a shotgun that spreads out.
That makes sense.
So that's an example. What I just did is an example of an intuition analogy. And that's one of the things they mentioned is that intuition savior types abuse analogies. Because analogies are a way to metaphors, and it's a way to like make a connection between two different things or concepts.
I love that.
Which can lose people because like a Nancy or the audience, if they're not following your intuitive leaps, they don't know what the fuck you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all accused of mercilessly beating metaphor, and intuition as a general is what?
Okay, so if you're a sensory type, you are trying to find answers in the facts of reality. And so you have to prove it. So a lot of the criticisms we have with the way we approach Enneagrammer in this pod, which is relying heavily on intuition, is that where is the evidence for what we're saying? I mean, the thing about anything, in the beginning of anything, it starts with an idea. But you do it enough, you eventually start to collect enough experiences where you do have data. So we've been doing Enneagrammer and, all this stuff in coaching for long enough that we can now draw conclusions. So one of the conclusions that we have drawn from experience is that we believe that at least 3/4 of population is an attachment type. Now that seems like how the fuck can you say that? I mean, now someone who's sensory dominant would actually go and collect data, maybe from all the record of everyone we've typed and
Mm.
actually do some kind of research to prove that
Mm.
assertion, right? And so most people are sensory, and sensory is about trying to find the answers in the data, in the facts, in the experiences that are
Grounded
provable.
reality, right?
Yeah, that's science. And so, not to say that there aren't intuition types in science, but it gets into conceptual sort of like physics or something where it's not even in reality anymore. We're like we've gone into the future, or we've gone into another dimension. So
Well-
with intuition, the answers can be found in the concepts and the abstractions. For example, let's say you've had these experiences that are in reality. Intuition is to say, I'm going to look at these experiences and draw conclusions, make guesses as to what it means. So that's what we
Make a
do on this.
model.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we do on this podcast. It's like, oh, we had this experience and this experience. What are some conclusions and implications we can draw for what this means as an overview? And, if you don't ground that overview in the reality, like you need both. If you're overdoing intuition, then you lose people and people don't know if you're on planet Earth anymore. But if you're doing too much sensory, people are like, what the fuck is the point? Where are you going with this?
This is why people are thirsty for Nancy on this.
Exactly.
She's the sensory.
She represents the sensory. So you can see how you could be living and approaching life completely differently depending on what you're overdoing. And it's like we're always abusing the fuck out of our savior functions because we believe this is, sort of like the dominant instinct. This is what's going to fucking save the day.
Yeah, so there are two dominant functions or savior functions. These are the ones that we rely on. That's why they're to save us, to navigate. And then those are in contrast to the polarity of demon functions, which are our two ones that we don't really trust or rely on. Is that the way to put it?
Yeah. And another way to put it, and this is something that was helpful in understanding Enneagram instinctual blind spot, is that in order to overemphasize your savior functions, by default, that means that you're pushing away from other functions, which means that those functions now become your demon functions, just like with the instinctual blind spot. In order for you to have a dominant instinct, you've got to really not pay attention to that last instinct, because that's what's propping up the dominant instinct. You can't have a dominant instinct without. It won't be dominant unless you're neglecting something.
Right.
So the demon functions are something that we're neglecting in order to focus so much on our saviors. And what that does is it creates a backlog of unaddressed shit that eventually, because it's a blind spot, you won't really notice it until it fucking punches you in the mouth at some point in life. And so, growth with both the Enneagram and with these, from the point of view of MBTI, which is we're still talking about personalities, like you've got to address your blind spot.
Yeah, I mean, as the three all know, like I'm going through a major, like this whole year has been like seeing how I've, like both from an instinctual point of view, and I also think from this system point of view of like ignoring my blind spot without even knowing, I didn't know I had these blind spots or they were as deep as they were. I'm now seeing like how I feel like, I was deeply betrayed, and used by like the three people I was spending the most time with over the last several years, and just like, and one thing after another that I just did not see coming. I was very naive about. And so, like that shit will kick your ass. It's been just like destroying everything.
Yeah, and for me, this year has been a big year in terms of being able to see myself and through, the relationship I'm in and some experiences that I've had. And it's just been a huge wake-up call that there are things about myself that I haven't realized because I'm not open to experiencing new, that there's such a very small channel of experiences that I'm open to. Like I've known about objective personality for years, but it took a sexual modalities video for me with like, oh, I'm going to actually go check that out now. Like, it's like, so how many things am I not paying attention to, or am I not, open to that could have the possibility of changing my life? I mean, here's a quick example. Just doing this podcast was a revelation for me. Is like, I'm actually good at producing audio content.
Yeah.
Like I'm really good at it. Not like, it's not something I have to really try that hard to do. And so I was like, I mean, this is something you take for granted. You assume that everyone likes music or just likes listening
Right.
to stuff. But then I started thinking about it. For example, John, like when you go into a new space, like a new apartment, the first thing you do is you set up all your artwork and
Right.
your objects, like your visual
Yeah.
space needs to
Yeah.
be attended to first. And for me, in college, it's not like I've had like great sound equipment, but the first thing I always set up when I get to a new room is my speakers. I just needed,
Ah,
Mhm.
sound. My sonic
interesting.
environment was the first thing that I needed to set up. And so that's always been there and you just sort of take it for granted. So doing this
Right.
pod was like, oh shit, like I'm actually really good at this. And I bought my first headphone monitors, which is just like professional studio headphones. And I spent like a good 24 hours just like shook because it just blew me away that it took me like 10, 15 years to buy one of these. Like it just hearing what I was hearing was like, I've never heard music like I'm hearing music
Oh,
now.
cool.
And I was just like stunned that I could go my whole life and not know this and
Mm.
just discover something that felt so life changing. And it just makes me feel like, man, what are some things that I'm missing
Yeah.
And so your
that are
your point is you're consume last, right?
yes, like yeah, whatever
Yeah.
your last, it's such a blind spot that it is the thing that's stopping you from, I don't know, being a fully formed human being. And there's so many things that it is the thing that you're neglecting to such a large degree that it's stopping your growth, stopping
Mm,
you from having certain experiences. So consume is like this ability to update your identity based on new input. And when you're not doing that, it's like you can get really stuck. And so it takes me 38 years to realize certain things about my chemistry, like that kind of stupid shit.
So
Yeah.
one more time, so your consume last, and how does that happen that you're consume last in this system in OP?
So if you are last in a certain function, then the opposite polarity function, or not function, animal, I should say, is dominant.
Sorry, one sec. Just because we are out of order a little bit, like the animal is a new term that represents the combination of functions, right? Like a common two functions working together create what's called an animal.
Right.
Which is like,
Yes.
And they got their own subcategories called blast, consume, sleep, and play.
Yes. Yeah. We've already kind of explained. I don't know if I went into detail, but like for example, blast is the combination of your introverted observer with your extroverted decider. So for John, he's a blast lead because he's a NIFE. His first two functions are NI and FE, which automatically creates the blast function animal. So you can be an INFJ, but with a different order of function animals, which gives you a much wider range of the different ways that a type could express itself. And I find that really useful, not just because of that's a cool concept, but because you can be an INFJ, and if you're play last like John, like your life struggles are going to be very different than an INFJ who's sleep last or consume last, for example. So
Mm-hmm.
from an inner development, inner growth standpoint, like it's really important to identify the order of your function animals. And sort of like a meme, like we make jokes on here about
Mhm.
how much of a blaster John is. Like he'll go on his blast rants. That's what blast and savior state is. And the saviors are kind of like drugs. And we just abuse the fuck out of our savior functions and our savior animals because this is what's going to fucking get it done.
So would you be able to go through? I don't know if I'm interrupting somebody else's question, so let me know if
You're
I'm
the only one who
derailing.
has questions.
So yeah, okay. So
You're running the show.
so all right. So like I want to touch back into because we talked about intuition versus sensation, but we didn't get into feeling versus thinking, and then what those introvert extrovert mean. But also maybe after that we can come back to what's like the way we might say like, oh, somebody who is social blind, they miss social cues, blah 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 blah. What would be like if somebody like a quick sketch of like somebody who is basically last in blast, in consume, in sleep, or in play? You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah. I can do that because that's easy. I just talked about consume last for me. So it's like someone who is, it's not like, oh, you don't read or you don't take in new information for yourself. But when you're last in a certain function, similar to what we've said about the instinctual blind spot, it's kind of compartmentalized and you get weird in the way that you do that that function animal. You're not like we talked about David and Nancy being blast last, and like me editing this pod, Nancy is trying to land on what she wants to say, but it's sort of like the struggle of trying to organize how to say it. And Blast is this ability to take the stuff that you know and organize it in a beginning, middle, and end. And so people who have Savior Blast somehow can, I think something that John and I are doing, and what I noticed when I say let it fly is that's just Blast. Like I feel like we can just figure out how to organize it, even though we don't necessarily know where it's going as we're speaking. And so also a way to sort of teach yourself is that I'm going to blast it to myself. And so this thing of I'm just going to start talking and I'm going to figure out how to organize what I'm talking about, even though I don't really know what I'm talking about. And somehow I end up organizing it by the end of, what I'm saying, so that's what Blast is doing. And people who are Blast last have a really difficult time doing that. And you're sort of allergic to that last function. And so a podcast medium is very much Blast play, those two function animals. And the higher those are for you, the easier it is for you to just sort of vomit out what you want to say and have it be coherent in how you want to say it. So that's Blast last. So play last for John is someone who play is about expending energy with people, the tribe, doing things. So pinging off of people, just having these random conversations, doing random things with people. And so when you're play last, you are only interested or only capable really of doing things within your box of your interests and things like that. And even if this is like a demon function animal, it's still something you're going to struggle with. I still think I probably have play as a demon function animal. But if it's your last function or if it's your blind spot, like you are crippled in your ability to dance with people energetically. You just it's hard for you to expend energy randomly with people that aren't in your box. It sounds social blind, of not able to really jump in the energy exchange with people.
That makes a lot of sense.
And so then sleep last, Joseph is sleep last, where sleep is about being able to process and preserve energy for the self. And so it sounds like self-pres. And so when you have experiences, sleep is the ability to go and figure out what this means for you and organize your experiences and how it's significant for you. And if you're not doing that, you have this blind spot where you can end up just running yourself into the ground, where you end up crashing, and feeling that you're forced to have to process for yourself and figure out what things mean. So like Joseph just went through a breakup recently, and his response to it was just I'm just going to move to another part of town and get back on the prowl. So it's just sort of like with sleep last, just processing, not really even processing, but just continuing with activity. And so we end up noticing, just like with the blind spots, it's really glaring things about people. Like this is where we're really weird. I think it's really easy to notice people's savior functions, but it's also, or function animals and savior functions. But the things that are fucked up about people and the things that are weird about people are that last function and that last animal. So
you're saying I'm a weird blaster? Ever so slightly.
Confirm.
It's like people can't understand what the fuck where does that mean? Where is that going? Like, what is the implication of this abstraction, David? I don't know, man. It's just cool stuff.
Just be with it, man.
Like there was one episode where I think when you started talking about the Trifix booklet, and John asked you, so what kind of experience would you like people to have from this? And you were like, just because he was going to write an intro for it, and you were like, just write whatever you think, like whatever.
You tell me.
Yeah, I don't know what I did.
You just know I did something.
Yeah.
So yeah, like Blast is, it's almost like you can look at the different roles that these function animals are playing in the whole process. So Blast is sort of preparing an experience for others. So if we were planning a party, the Blast person would be like, well, we need to have music here, lights here.
It's partly context. It sounds like Blast. Like that's my thing. Is I like John gave the booklet the context.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like why it's important. why it matters, why people should give a fuck. And a lot of times when I'm listening back to the pod, I mean, it's one thing to be on the pod, but it's another thing to be, editing and figuring out like what the pod is going to be. Because now I'm looking at it from the perspective of a listener, and like I'm always thinking, why should anyone give a fuck about this stretch of 5-10 minutes of this conversation? Is this something that anyone should hear? And does it add or subtract from the episode? That's what Blast is doing. Anyone who's like producing anything is thinking about how this is going to be received by that person. And so how do I change aspects of this thing so people can have a certain experience? That's what Blast is doing. And so that's what Blast is doing with information in terms of teaching. It's like, yeah, the Enneagram, but I'm here to tell you what aspects of the Enneagram that you should pay attention to, what you should emphasize, and what you should forget. That's what a teacher or a blaster is doing.
And so, yeah, so can you circle back to feeling versus thinking, what that represents, and then what it means when they're extroverted or introverted?
Okay, so feeling is about valuing, and I mean, not just emotions, but emotions are irrational. When you like a certain T-shirt, you don't need reasons for why you like it. It's just you're valuing it. And so the difference between extroverted versus introverted feeling is personal. Like John likes Egypt. You could say that that's an introverted feeling interest. But, because John is a savior FE, he is framing his interest in Egypt in how it's valuable to people on a spectrum, like to the whole. So it's not just like, I just like Egypt, fuck off. It's more that Egypt represents something about inner work that we should all be paying attention to. That sort of thing. That's extroverted feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So introverted feeling is more like David, where it's like, I discovered this thing with the Bhava Chakra and it's interesting. Why don't you get into it? That sort of a thing. It's not necessarily trying to explain. He's having a harder time explaining why people as a whole should value the Bhava Chakra. But that's more or less the question that you're asking him, John, is why is this significant to everyone? And for David, this is mainly significant to me. I mean, others might be able to gain some insight, but it's significant to me and it's valuable to me. That's the difference.
And for me, it's like I'm handing it to you, and I don't care what you do with it. You take this crazy magic ball and do something with it, and I don't, you know what I mean? I don't need to direct it or teach it, kind of.
Right.
Right.
And for thinking, extroverted thinking is TE, which is, like taking David's thing. And I think this is what I do, is taking David's FI, Bhava Chakra, and picking out something like the collage exercise that can be useful, and you can actually give some logical reasons for why this is useful for instincts, because it's actually something that we can use to type. So that's more TE. Like a bunch of people on a spectrum can use this thing, and we can figure out how to make it work for us, a wider spectrum of people. That's extroverted thinking. And TI is my own personal logical reasons for that, why this works. I'm doing my best with these definitions. I'm not like, but that's basically the gist.
So is there anything that, like, since we're kind of just doing like a casual overview, like, is there anything else that seems like important to get into about these? Because let's see, I'm looking, like, one thing I guess you talked about observer and decider, and I'm unclear what those are.
Okay, that's actually a big deal. Similar to the hexad versus attachment distinction that we discovered this year, the observer versus decider is almost like two different species of human. Like, there's a huge, binary divide. So observers talk about things. So this podcast is an observer podcast. We're talking about personality, and we're talking about categories, and we're trying to understand them. But it's not. We're not having a decider conversation. And decider conversation is much more about identity. It sounds social, even though it's not. So it's deciders talk about, what this person did, and what it meant to them. There's a lot more like that image-centered sort of shame around how I'm being perceived versus my identity versus what the tribe on the spectrum feels or thinks. So the decider functions are FI and TI and TE and FE. So introverted decider is like I'm prioritizing my own personal identity and my own personal values first, but I'm neglecting the tribes or the external world's values. And so if someone is dominant in a decider function, that is their whole world. That's where they're sensitive. Whereas if someone who is dominant in an observer function, which is like NI, any of the sensor observer functions are SI, NI, or NE and NI. Yeah, NE, NI, SI, and SE. You're talking about things, and you're talking about order versus chaos. And so when observers start talking about stuff, it's like I had this experience where I almost got into an accident, or I had this experience where I let this wrong person into my life, and I'm trying to understand, this sort of control versus chaos versus, and then the deciders are talking about, oh, this person did this to me, or because this person said or thought this thing about me, it prevented me from having this experience in life. Have you noticed that thing where certain people have bad experiences and they blame people versus instead of blaming circumstances? That's a decider conversation. It's somebody else's fault. Whereas an observer is like looking at, it may be someone, but someone as a representative of a thing.
Well, I mean, like with my thing, I keep blaming my blind spot.
Yes, exactly.
What was I doing that allowed somebody like that into my life?
So yes, that's why we have the conversations we do, because we're not necessarily having conversations about people. Like I think a lot of times when people take typing personally, that seems like more of a decider point of view, because the observer point of view is saying that you are separate from your personality. It's just a representation of a personality dynamic. So when something goes wrong, you want to understand the dynamic. You're not going to blame the person, or if you get typed a certain way, it's not necessarily means that we hate you. We don't care about you personally. It's just a category.
We
So
might
that's-
hate you.
But it's not you specifically. You might hate people in general.
True.
So it's a decider versus that distinction is huge, because it's a completely different orientation, and it feels like you attract people generally, or you feel comfortable with people who are on the same side of that coin.
So people always ask, like, introducing Enneagram type, like how can you figure out your type? So how do you, like, what's the, like, it seems like this would be almost, I mean, at least to me, more complicated to figure out your type.
Somewhat, yeah.
We were inspired to start Dark Arts Academy because we saw that they were making videos around typing. I mean, we've been wanting to do videos around typing or some kind of course around typing for a long time, but just to see that, oh, people actually want to consume content on a weekly basis around typing. And so seeing them do that was not only, it's like, this is really useful, but it's also really entertaining. So they walk through the way that they type, and they have a process. And I think, I'm trying to see what I can apply that's similar to the Enneagram. For example, hexad versus attachment is such a huge distinction. So you can start there. Can you make a distinction that this person is a hexad type or an attachment type? And so they usually start with observer versus decider, because it's such a huge difference. Like what you talk about, the way you see the world. So that splits, in half the possibilities. If you can figure out if someone is, abusing or overdoing observer versus decider, that narrows things down. And then they go from there and say, is this someone who's abusing intuition or abusing sensory? Because that's a big difference. And then you can go, is this introverted or is this extroverted? So, I mean, it's not easy, but it's...
One thing to say, too, is what you're saying. First of all, in total, when you do all the micro little distinctions in that system in OPS, there's 512 types. So what you're doing when you do that first decider versus observer, you're just eliminating, what is that? 206? Yeah, 266 or whatever that is. 56. That kind of thing. Anyway.
Yeah, like the thing about typing with the Enneagram is that once you understand the structure of the Enneagram type, like, for example, maybe we start out with the centers, like, all right, is this person a body type, thinking type, or a heart type?
Yeah.
So that narrows things down. And then you just go from there. And I think what I like about what they've created with objective personality is that similar deal is going on, that there are these distinctions that they've been able to make, and if you can triangulate on 3 distinctions, you can nail down what someone's type is. Just like if you can triangulate with the Enneagram, like, okay, this is a head type. Oh, they seem like a positive type, or they're reactive. Now you need just like one more, and you can nail down what someone's type is. And if you just get good at observing and making those distinctions and being able to triangulate on, because the Enneagram, you have to be able to hold multiple distinctions at once. If you can find 3 distinctions, you can nail down somebody's type on a consistent basis. That's what we're trying to show people with dark arts. Is like, once you learn what these distinctions are and how they show up in people, you can actually type people pretty quickly. And not only do that, but be able to confirm it the more you watch. And that's what they have way more distinctions with OPS than we have with the Enneagram. And just to see that they've been able to create these distinctions, and you can triangulate them, and that they are able to type the same person separately and arrive at the same answer, means like, okay, you have a system that has sharp distinctions that you can consistently arrive at the same conclusion. And that's why the Enneagram hooked me in the first place. It's like, oh, these types are real, and this is a consistent way that they show up, and which means that there are hard line implications on what this means in the way people live and function.
Actually, personality is about motivation, not behavior. And you can't know anybody better than they know themselves. And
right.
all that bullshit.
We should, I was thinking we needed to do an episode on that alone.
Yeah,
because that's something
great.
That's true. Yeah,
that's a really good idea.
That's really something that people repeat so much, and it's just to see that how can we help people understand that personality is not just what you're motivated by, that it's spilling out nonstop all the time.
Yeah, that's really good. I think after we do, I might actually put that in the calendar because I kind of forget some of the stuff. But like we should, after we do the drunk pod, let's do that one.
Yeah, that would be a fun one.
We should wrap up here pretty quick because I got to go. But
me too.
I think we should do a follow up with this, just more about like implications of and crossovers and things like that.
Yeah, like I think this we started off with what the sexual polarity and attraction and compatibility, and just why this was significant for that. The sexual
I'd love to get more into that because now now that we've got these building blocks, then the masculine feminine thing we can get into.
Yeah. Like on that thing that graphic that I sent, you'll see that mine starts with MF, so that's masculine, feminine, and some people are FF and MM and FM.
Yeah, let's do that next time we talk about this system.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people are pissed off about OP, and I just think it's hilarious. If you're doing anything original, how fucking mad people are.
Right.
I think it's just a rich way to explore personality. I've learned a lot from their system.
Cool. Well,
there's Nancy with her sleep.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You got it, Nancy.
Yeah. I usually mute myself, but we're ending, so.
Yeah. All right, I gotta get going, but this has been pretty interesting, and this is good. Like, because it's been so much. Like, you guys have brought this up a lot, but it's kind of been too opaque for me. So this breaking it down into bits is good.
Yeah, it's also nice to hear Emika talking for a change.
Shut the fuck up, Nancy.
We're just exchanging one blaster for another.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey, I have a type. What can I say?
Pretty soon, they'll get tired of me and be like, "We want John back."
Yeah, because we're never gonna get David
or Nancy.
No.
It's not our role.
It's just like hilarious. Like, John will be asking Nancy, "So tell me about this," and Nancy's like,
I literally have to think about it for 5 minutes.
I gotta like chop off like 30 seconds of Nancy like trying to figure out how to. And then John won't let it go. He won't take a hint that maybe No, he's like, "So tell me more about."
Can you say more? I hate the. Can you say more? No.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. I just thought, she just needs more questions to figure out what come out.
No. Can you say more is fine if you say what you want me to say.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, John's blast, it's
I need context, man.
Your blast has to be, or your questions, I should say. Your questions have to be translated. And in the past I'd do it, but sometimes it's just like
some good
hard.
Things have come from John not translating his questions for me.
How do they need to be translated? Like, I'm not understanding.
Exactly.
Well, for example, you asked the question, I think, like, what does it mean to have a good attachment and what are the factors that make an attachment good or something like that? And I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, there's no way anyone's going to answer this question. And then there was a long pause, and then John was like, what do you, and somebody like asked the clarifying question, and John made it even more complicated.
He did.
Follow up.
He did.
And I was like, this is not going to go anywhere. And it didn't. And then when it came around to David, he was like, I still don't understand what the question is. That was after like Courtney tried to explain, I think what John is trying to say.
Courtney can
is-
sometimes get it.
Dude, that shit was like, the first time I listened to it, I was like, nobody's going to want to hear this. And then the second time I listened to it after I like edited it, I was like, okay, so it's not that bad. But it's just hilarious, like how like a dog on a bone. John is like, I want my question and I'm not going to explain it to you.
I feel like it's so clear. Like,
No, it's not. It's not at all.
because it's like, how do I? Yeah. Anyway, how do I?
Like,
How do
for
I
example,
explain
like
this such an-
even if people answer, the answer that they come up with isn't really an answer because it's like they don't really know where to go with your question.
Interesting.
I think that's the point of his questions.
It's just
I
like,
feel like sometimes I know that I'm having a hard time finding the language, but I feel like the intent or like I feel like it's like I don't know, something like that. I feel like, well, yeah, what's a good attachment versus a bad attachment? Seems like a
No.
no.
interesting.
And I don't even know how you would put that in a simpler way either. Like, I can't just be like, oh, well, another way to ask this. Because
Right? Yeah.
it doesn't
What-
make any sense to me.
What? Because I thought about this quite a bit, and I was realizing that some calls that we do and we stall out, it'll be because somebody is trying to bite off too much that anyone can chew. And so usually what
Mhm.
happens, we end up with these sort of like large insights because they get stacked on top of other insights, which you throw David or Nancy or whoever a softball and they can answer it quickly, and then somebody else can jump in and build on that, and eventually 30-45 minutes later we jump on something like a big, like, how is a good attachment formed? And then that's one part of it. And the second part of it is I saw a video on YouTube on a thing that Wired was doing as to like some expert had to explain a difficult concept all the way from
Oh, I
kindergarten.
love those videos.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I see. So he was explaining, I forget what it was, black holes or something like that, to like from kid to grade school to high school to college, and then someone who's an expert in the field. So to see how he could take a really difficult concept and make it so simple that a child could have a conversation with him is like, that is, I mean, it's just like a skill of conversation. But I was like, what is it about like Joe Rogan that's so compelling to listen to? Because he's a fucking idiot to me. But he has an ability to ask questions that people are eager to answer.
Yeah.
And I mean, he simplifies things because he's not the smartest guy, but he's not dumb either. But I've seen guests on the Joe Rogan show go on other shows with really smart people like Tim Ferriss, who's a really smart guy. He was also Play Last, where he's like, similar to John, he's like, he wants the information. It's like he asks very specific questions, and if you want the information, you might find that show more useful. But the conversation suffers
And be a
because
bit dry. Yeah.
it's pretty dry. I think it's just something to work on, John. Like your play is like, how do I frame things in a way that people want to talk?
Where there's some bounce to it or something.
Yeah, like they want to ping off what I've said because it's so specific that no one can ping off of what you've said.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to like. Well, I really do have to go, but I have to figure out like, because this like as a blind spot or whatever. Like I'm not. It's like still blind to me what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, I have to get going.
All right.
All right, guys.
All right, later.
Okay.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.
Gonna make it good, gonna rock, shock, rock it through your neighborhood. Gonna read, gonna sing it till it's understood. My rapping about to happen like a knee. You was slapping or I thought you been tapping on a hunk of wood. But a red suited dude with a friendly attitude and a slave full of goodies for the people on the block. Got a long white beard, maybe looks kinda weird, and if you ever see him, he can give you quite a shock. Now people, let me tell you about last year when the dude came flying over here. Well, the hawk was out, snow was on the ground. Folks stayed in to party down. The beat was thumping on the box, and I was dancing in my socks. And the drummer played at a solid pace, and the taste of the bass was in my face.